The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that smelled like rain and coffee. The kind Hannah Moore had stopped expecting surprises from, her daughter. Mia was eating cereal at the counter, humming a tune from school. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, the sound of the lake whispering through the open kitchen window. Vermont in October had a way of sneaking inside gold leaves underfoot. Cool light on the walls. Hannah flipped through the mail without thinking. Bills, coupons, the local paper. Then a letter, cream-colored, handwritten, real ink. She frowned. Her name wasn't on it. It read, "To my dearest Lily, wherever you are." No address, just a date, 8 years ago. Something about it made her pause. People didn't write like that anymore. She turned it over. The sender's name was smudged, but she could make out 2 words. Ethan Clarke. The name rang a faint bell. Maybe from an article she once read, or the kind of name that sounded like it belonged to someone who mattered, for reasons she couldn't explain. Hannah didn't toss it aside. She placed it on the counter beside her coffee mug, and stared at it as though it might decide whether or not to open itself. Mia looked up. "Mum, you're staring at your coffee again." Hannah blinked, smiling faintly. "Am I? You do that when you're thinking about Dad," Mia said matter-of-factly. Hannah froze for a heartbeat, then exhaled softly. "Maybe I'm just thinking about the mailman," Mia giggled. "Mailmen don't make you sad." "No," Hannah murmured. "They just bring things you didn't ask for." Later that morning, after dropping Mia off at school, she drove to the post office, a small brick building by the diner, where everyone still knew everyone's name. Tom, the postmaster, was sorting envelopes behind the counter. "Hey, Tom," she said, holding up the letter. "This got dropped in my box by mistake." He squinted. "Let's see. Huh. No return address. Old stamp. Weird. Looks like it's been floating around for years. You think it's one of those undelivered mail projects you were talking about?" she asked. "Could be," he said. "We've been getting lost stuff from the old route lately. Storm knocked a few boxes loose last spring. Some letters never found their way back." He looked at it again. "You said this went to your address?" "Yeah, number 12, Lakeshore Drive." Tom hesitated. "That's odd. The sender's address, see that faded line? Says number 18, Lakeshore Drive. That's the old Bennett house across the lake. Somebody just moved in there last week." That night, Hannah sat by the window after Mia had gone to bed, the letter still on the table. She'd thought about returning it, but curiosity kept her still. Who was Lily? And why did Ethan Clarke's words find her after 8 years? Outside, the lake shimmered faintly under the moon, the reflection of a house visible across the dark water. A light flickered on in the window. A figure moved past the curtain. The Bennett house. Number 18. So that's him. She ran her thumb over the edge of the envelope. It was sealed, the paper worn soft, like it had been held too many times. The next day, she walked down the trail that curved along the lake, the letter in her pocket. The leaves crunched beneath her boots. Her breath made small ghosts in the cold air. When she reached the gate, the house stood quiet, grey wood, shutters, the faint sound of piano drifting through the glass. She hesitated, then knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. He was taller than she expected. Late 30s maybe, with eyes the colour of storms before rain. His left hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Hi," Hannah said, holding up the envelope. "I think this belongs to you." He looked at it, then at her. For a moment, something flickered across his face, recognition or pain. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "It was in my mailbox," she said. "I figured it might have been lost." He nodded slowly, taking it. "Lost," he repeated, almost to himself. Yeah, that sounds right. There was a pause, long enough for her to notice the faint scar near his wrist. The way his voice carried exhaustion, the kind that comes from things left unsaid. Thank you, he said finally, for bringing it back. Hannah smiled politely. No problem. She turned to leave, but he called out, wait. She stopped. I'm sorry, he said, voice softer now. It's just, that letter was supposed to be gone forever. She frowned. You didn't want it back. He shook his head. Some letters aren't meant to be found. The next morning came with a pale sun and mist curling over the lake. From her kitchen window, Hannah could just make out the shape of the house across the water. Grey, still, quiet. It had rained during the night, and the surface of the lake shimmered with small ripples like a sheet of glass breathing. She tried not to look at it, but her eyes found it anyway. The house that now held the man with the letter. She told herself it didn't matter. That whatever story belonged to Ethan Clarke had nothing to do with her. But as she packed Mia's lunch, her mind wandered. A letter to a woman named Lily, dated 8 years ago. Words that were never meant to be found. She'd returned it, just like she was supposed to. Yet a part of her couldn't stop wondering, what could someone write to a ghost? At school drop-off, Mia pressed her small hand into Hannah's. Can we walk by the lake later? She asked. I want to see the ducks before they go. Sure, Hannah said, forcing a smile. Maybe the new neighbor will come too, Mia said, glancing across the water. I saw him yesterday. He looked sad. Did you talk to him? No, he was sitting by the dock, looking at the sky. Maybe he misses someone. Hannah swallowed. Maybe he does. That afternoon, the rain returned. She tried grading papers at the kitchen table, but the sound of water against glass made her restless. She kept glancing at the corner of the counter, at the space where the letter had sat before she returned it. It felt emptier than before. On impulse, she pulled open the drawer where she kept old notebooks. Inside was a stack of envelopes, yellowed, tied with string. Letters she'd written after her husband, Ben, died. Letters she'd never mailed to anyone. She untied the string and opened the first one. Dear Ben, I still wash your mug every morning, just in case you come back for coffee. I know that's stupid, but it's something to do with my hands while I remember how to breathe. She stopped reading halfway through, her throat tightening. It had been years since she'd looked at these words. Fragile things that once kept her alive. A knock at the door startled her. She closed the notebook, quickly wiping her eyes. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there, rain dripping from his coat. He looked like he'd walked straight out of a storm. I'm sorry to bother you, he said, voice low. But I think this belongs to you now. He held out the same envelope, the letter, the one she'd returned. She blinked. What are you doing? I tried burning it, he said simply. But it wouldn't burn. Maybe it was waiting for the right person to read it. I'm not, she began. He shook his head. You found it. Maybe that means something. She hesitated. You don't even know me. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's why I trust you, Rain whispered against the porch roof. For a moment, the world was just the two of them and the sound of water falling on wood. Finally, she took the envelope. I'll keep it safe, she said quietly. He nodded once. That's all I ask. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog like someone fading between worlds. That night, she sat by the window again. The envelope lay on the table, half in shadow, half in light. She traced her finger along the edge, the paper cool under her skin. She should have left it sealed. She knew that, but loneliness, she'd learned, had a way of sounding exactly like curiosity. Slowly, she slid a knife under the flap. The paper gave a soft sigh. My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, then somehow the world allowed me to reach you again. They told me the sea takes everything it wants, But I still hope it left you something, a photograph, a smell, a piece of me in the things we shared. I don't know how to write without you. Every sentence breaks halfway through, as if the words forget where they were going. I'm leaving for Vermont tomorrow. There's a lake there, quiet, the kind you'd have loved. Maybe I'll learn to live with the echoes of you there. Until then, I'll keep the last promise I made. I'll keep writing, even when there's no one left to write to. Hannah's breath caught Vermont, the lake. He had written this before coming here. Before she even lived in this town. It wasn't just a letter. It was a map, a grief that had led him to the same place. Hers had once ended. She folded it carefully and looked across the water. His house glowed faintly in the distance. A single lamp burning near the window. For reasons she couldn't name, she whispered into the dark, "Good night, Lily." Outside, the rain slowed. And for the first time in years, Hannah didn't feel entirely alone. The first time Hannah saw Ethan again after that rainy night, he was standing by the farmer's market, studying a jar of honey like it was something fragile. The morning was cool and gold, the kind of early autumn sunlight that made everything look temporary. He hadn't noticed her at first. His hair was damp, his sleeves rolled, his expression distant in a way that felt almost familiar. Then Mia tugged at Hannah's sleeve. "Mum, isn't that the man from the lake?" Before she could answer, Ethan looked up. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. He smiled politely. "Morning," Hannah nodded. "Hi, didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," he said, setting the jar down. "I'm still learning where people actually buy food in this town. The grocery store scared me off." She smiled despite herself. "It does that to everyone the first week." Mia peeked from behind her. "Are you the writer?" Ethan blinked. "The writer? The one who writes letters," she said proudly. "My mom found one." Hannah froze. Mia, but Ethan just smiled gently. "I used to write a lot." "Yeah. Why'd you stop?" Mia asked. He hesitated, his gaze softening. "Because I didn't know who to write to anymore." The girl tilted her head, thoughtful. "Then maybe you can write to us." Later, when Mia ran off to chase a stray cat by the stalls, Hannah turned to him. "I'm sorry about that," she said, embarrassed. "She has no filter. She reminds me of someone I used to know," he said. "Someone who asked questions that never had answers." "Lily?" she asked before she could stop herself. He looked at her then, sharply, then softer, as if weighing whether to respond. "Yes," he said quietly. "Lily." They stood there a moment, surrounded by the hum of the market, the smell of baked bread and apples. Two people suddenly aware of the silence between them. When he spoke again, his tone was lighter. "You live on the lake full time?" She nodded. 6 years now. Bought the place after my husband passed. Needed quiet. "I get that," he said. "I came for the same reason. Except I don't think quiet is what I needed. Just distance." "Distance from what?" He gave a faint smile. "Everything." They parted with small talk, promises to wave next time across the water. But that evening, Hannah found herself watching the opposite shore again. His house had a light in the study window, flickering. For some reason, she imagined him sitting at a desk, the letter still on the table beside him. She opened her own notebook and wrote something for the first time in months. "There's a man across the lake who looks like someone learning how to breathe again." She didn't know why she wrote it. Maybe because she recognized that look. 2 days later, Ethan showed up at the elementary school. He stood awkwardly by the art classroom doorway, holding a box of books. "Hi," he said when he saw her. "I called the principal, offered to start a writing club for the kids. They said you teach here." Hannah blinked. "You're serious?" He shrugged. "Figured I'd try something that doesn't involve hospitals and deadlines." She laughed. "That's unexpectedly generous." I owe the town something for letting me hide here. And what do you owe yourself? He smiled faintly, still figuring that out. Mia was the first to sign up for his club. The second meeting, she handed Ethan a drawing, a blue envelope with wings. It's a flying letter, she explained, so no one loses it again. Ethan smiled, eyes warm. I'll keep it that night. He placed the drawing on his desk beside Lily's old photograph, and the letter that Hannah had opened but never returned. For the first time in years, he uncapped his pen. Dear someone I haven't met yet. Today a little girl told me letters can fly. Maybe she's right. Maybe some of them land where they're supposed to, even if it takes years. Across the lake, Hannah read to Mia in bed. When the girl finally fell asleep, she went to the window. The two houses mirrored each other in the dark, hers with the soft lamp glow, his with the steady light in the study. The distance between them looked smaller than before. She whispered, "Good night, Ethan," and somewhere across the water he looked up. As if hearing her, the days began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings with coffee and lake fog. Afternoons at school, the sound of children's laughter echoing down the hallways. And evenings, the golden hour when everything softened, became Hannah's favorite part of the day, because sometimes, just before sunset, she'd see him walking along the dock. Sometimes with a notebook, sometimes with a cup of tea. Always alone, it took her a week to join him. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with pink and copper, and the lake smelled faintly of pine. Ethan looked up when he heard her steps on the dock. I was starting to think you were avoiding me. I was, she said, smiling faintly. But I ran out of excuses. He chuckled. That's fair. Most people do, eventually. Do what? Run out of excuses not to talk. They sat side by side on the edge of the dock, their shoes almost touching the water. The surface of the lake shimmered, reflecting the trees like a broken mirror. After a while, he asked, "Do you ever feel like time moves differently here?" "Slower?" she asked. "Quieter," he said. "Like it's giving us space to listen to the things we've been ignoring." She looked out across the water. "Maybe that's why we both ended up here. Running away?" he asked. Trying to breathe, she corrected softly. He smiled. "Good answer." A small silence followed. Not awkward, just honest. Then he said, "You mentioned your husband before." "I'm sorry," she nodded once. "It was a long time ago. But not gone," he said gently. She glanced at him. "How'd you know?" He looked at the lake. "Because I talk about Lily the same way." The name hung in the air between them, like a ripple neither of them wanted to disturb. After a moment, Hannah said quietly, "Do you want to tell me about her?" He hesitated. She was everything I wasn't. Loud, fearless, too curious for her own good. She used to leave notes everywhere. Grocery lists that turned into poems. Scribbles on napkins. Receipts. The margins of my drafts. She sounds like someone who didn't know how to leave quietly. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that cracked at the edges. "No, she didn't. And how did you lose her?" Hannah asked softly. "A storm," he said simply. "Wrong place, wrong night. I was supposed to be there too, but the flight got cancelled. I found her letter in the wreckage days later." She inhaled slowly. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence again, but this time it felt different, shared, not heavy. The kind of silence that says, "I understand." Ethan pulled a folded page from his notebook. "Can I show you something?" She nodded. He handed it to her, a few lines written in slanted, careful handwriting. "Some days, the wind sounds like footsteps. Some nights, I swear I see her shadow in the water. Maybe grief is just love with nowhere to go." Hannah's throat tightened. Beautiful, maybe, he said. Or maybe it's just what's left when words can't fix anything. She hesitated, then said quietly, I used to write to. Letters, mostly. To Ben. What did you write about? Nothing important. Groceries, Mia's drawings, the weather, the things I couldn't say out loud. Do you still have them? She nodded. All of them. You ever read them? Only when I want to remember what it felt like to believe he was still listening. He looked at her for a long moment, then said, maybe he still is. The sun began to sink behind the trees, painting the water gold. Mia's laughter echoed faintly from the yard, chasing ducks again. Do you think grief ever ends? Hannah asked. No, he said. But it changes shape. One day it stops being something that breaks you and becomes something that reminds you why you loved in the first place. She smiled faintly. That sounds like something a writer would say. I guess it's easier to write than to live, he admitted. Maybe, she said. But you're still trying. That counts for something. When they finally stood, the first stars were starting to appear above the lake. Ethan looked at her and said softly, you ever think some people are meant to find each other in the aftermath? She tilted her head. Like survivors. Like echoes, he said. Different lives, same sound. She smiled. I think maybe you just described friendship. He smiled back. Then I'll take it. That night, after Mia fell asleep, Hannah walked down to the water again. The dock creaked under her feet. Across the lake, a single light glowed in Ethan's house. She pulled out one of her old letters, unfolded it slowly, and added a line at the bottom. Dear Ben, I met someone who reminds me what it's like to talk again. Then she folded it, pressed it against her chest, and whispered to the quiet water. Thank you for letting me stay. It began almost by accident. One afternoon, Hannah found a small envelope tucked between the boards of the dock. No name. Just a single line written in blue ink on the front, for whoever still listens to the water. Inside, a note short, simple. Sometimes I wonder if the lake remembers us, if it knows the weight of all the things we tried to throw away. No signature, no explanation, but she knew the handwriting. That evening, she wrote a reply on a torn page from her notebook and slid it under the same plank. Maybe it does remember. Maybe that's why it never stays still. The next morning, the note was gone, and a new one appeared. I used to think stillness meant peace, but now I think it's just another way to hide. For the first time in years, Hannah felt something like anticipation again. Quiet, cautious, but alive. Not for an answer, but for the conversation itself. So they kept writing, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice, always unsigned. They never mentioned the letters in person. They'd talk about the weather, about Mia's art projects, about the way the maple trees turned copper earlier that year, but not about the notes they left. Behind it was as if the letters existed in another version of their lives, the one where words didn't need to be careful. In one note, he wrote, I remember the night it rained so hard the world sounded like a drum. Lily used to hum to it, said storms were the sky trying to remember a song. Now, when it rains, I listen for the melody and wonder if it's the same one. And she replied, Ben used to hate storms. He said they made him feel small. I told him that was the point, to remind us we never really controlled anything. He never quite forgave me for being right. Autumn bled slowly into early winter. The lake began to crust at the edges, thin sheets of ice catching the morning light. The days shortened. The silence deepened, but their letters continued, like heartbeat and breath, steady, invisible, necessary. One day, Hannah found a note that read, Do you ever worry that healing means forgetting? She stared at it for a long time before replying. No, Healing just means you've stopped needing the pain to prove it mattered. It was strange. The way words made room for truth in the letters. She found herself saying things she never could aloud. How some mornings she still set 2 coffee cups out by habit. How she sometimes caught her reflection in the window and didn't recognize the woman looking back in return. Ethan wrote about the years after Lily died, the noise, the interviews, the endless trying to be fine for other people. He wrote about exhaustion and guilt and the strange comfort of disappearing. They weren't love letters. Not yet, but they were something close. One night, Mia asked, "Mum, why do you go to the dock every morning?" Hannah smiled. "To talk to the lake." "What does it say?" "Mostly it just listens, like Dr. Clarke." She paused. "Yeah, like him." Mia grinned. "Then maybe the lake likes him too." As the weeks went on, the letters grew longer. "Do you ever miss who you were before the world fell apart?" "Sometimes. But I think she'd be proud I kept going. I dreamed of her again last night." She was laughing, but I couldn't hear the sound. Maybe it wasn't silence. Maybe it was peace. Each exchange became a thread, weaving between their 2 houses. Crossing the lake unseen, Hannah began to write, not because she was lonely, but because it felt right to be known, even if only through paper and ink. One evening, she found a letter waiting with something extra, a pressed maple leaf tucked inside. "Red and brittle, veins like rivers. Found this on my walk today. Thought you'd like it." It reminded me that some things change color before they let go. She smiled, held the leaf up to the lamplight, and whispered, "Thank you," though there was no one to hear it that night. Snow began to fall, soft, slow, the first of the season. Hannah sat at her desk, writing by the window, while the world outside turned white dot. "Dear someone, maybe grief is just another kind of letter, one we keep rewriting until we finally learn who to send it to. I hope you find your address someday." She folded the paper and slipped it into the dock plank, her breath clouding the air. Across the lake, she could see the faint glow of his study window. For the first time in a long time, the distance didn't feel empty. It felt like connection. The lake froze completely by mid-December. Mornings came pale and cold, breath visible in the air, the world quiet in that peculiar way only winter can make it quiet. You could hear your own heartbeat in that stillness. Hannah walked the trail every morning now, bundled in scarves, her boots crunching over snow. She'd grown used to the ritual: drop off Mia at school, stop by the dock, check beneath the loose plank. Sometimes there was a letter waiting, sometimes not. But even when there wasn't, she looked anyway, because the act of looking had become its own comfort. That Thursday, she found one, folded smaller than usual. "Do you ever get scared when things start feeling okay again? Like the quiet is just waiting to break?" "I do. Every time I laugh, I wait for the echo to disappear. But lately, the echoes have started to sound like voices, like someone calling me back." She traced the words with her thumb. It was the first time his letters had mentioned hope. She smiled without meaning to, and that's when she heard the crunch of footsteps behind her, checking the ice. Ethan's voice. She turned. He stood at the edge of the dock, coat collar up, hands in his pockets, breath clouding in the cold air. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm just waiting for a sign." He grinned slightly. "You're braver than me. I never trust frozen things." "Then you've never skated before?" "Never," he admitted. "I'm more of a fall and break my neck type." They ended up walking along the shore, talking about nothing and everything. Christmas lights, the smell of pine, how Vermont winters could make you feel both safe and trapped at the same time. At one point, he said quietly, "You ever notice how sound carries farther in the cold?" She nodded. "It's like the world's holding its breath." He looked at her for a long moment. and something unspoken passed between them, something too delicate to name. Over the next few weeks, their letters became shorter, but their conversations longer. They started meeting, without planning to, at the coffee shop, the school parking lot, the grocery store. Sometimes they'd just wave. Sometimes they'd talk for hours about nothing in particular. The letters, though, didn't stop. They simply changed. The lake feels smaller lately. Or maybe we're just closer. Today, I saw you laughing. It sounded like the first thaw. I used to think silence was the absence of sound. Now I think it's what happens when two people finally stop pretending they're alone. One evening, Hannah invited him for dinner, just as thanks, she said, though she wasn't sure what exactly she was thanking him for. He brought a bottle of red wine, a little awkward in the doorway, still wearing his scarf. "Hope you like overcooked pasta," she joked. "I've survived worse," he said, smiling. They talked about everything except their letters. Mia asked him about his work. He told her stories of the cities he'd been to, the people he'd met. He spoke softly, but with the ease of someone rediscovering joy. When she went to bed, the house felt quieter, not empty, just full in a new way. After dinner, they stood by the window, looking out at the snow falling over the frozen lake. He said, "You ever feel like we're standing in a postcard?" She smiled. "If only postcards paid the bills." He laughed. Then, quieter, "It's been a long time since I felt like I was somewhere I belonged." "You think you do now?" He looked at her, the faintest sadness in his eyes. "I'm trying." A beat passed. Then she said, "I still have that first letter, you know." He didn't pretend not to understand. "I figured," he said softly. "Does it still hurt to read?" "Not as much," she said. "It's strange. It doesn't feel like it's about her anymore." "Not really," he hesitated, then whispered, "Maybe it never was." For a long while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick with all the things they weren't ready to say. Outside, snow kept falling, slow, patient, endless. Finally, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. When you write, do you ever write about now? About this?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I used to write about ghosts. Lately, I just write about light." "Light," he nodded. "Yeah, the kind that doesn't fade, even when you think it should." Her heart tightened. "I think I've read that somewhere." He smiled faintly. "Maybe you have." That night, when he left, Hannah went down to the dock again. The snow was deep, soft under her boots. She slipped one more letter under the plank, her handwriting trembling in the cold. "I think I've been waiting for silence to sound like this. Maybe the stillness isn't the absence of love. Maybe it's where love begins again." She pressed the paper down gently, her breath misting in the air. Then she looked across the frozen lake. In the window of his house, a single light flicked on and stayed burning. The thaw came slowly that year. Ice broke in thin, silver cracks across the lake, and the wind began to smell faintly of earth again. It was the kind of change you almost didn't notice until you realized the world was breathing differently. Hannah felt it too, a quiet shift. Ethan came over more often now, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit. They didn't need excuses anymore. But sometimes, she caught a flicker in his eyes, a shadow that didn't belong to the man she'd come to know. He'd go quiet at random moments, as if remembering something that didn't fit this new piece. She wanted to ask, but never did. Every healed person knows, some silences are stitches. One Saturday morning, she was cleaning the attic boxes of old clothes, photos, and the dust of years that refused to leave. Mia was at a friend's house. The house was still at the bottom of a trunk. She found an old box marked BEN Personal. Inside, letters, maps, his rescue badge. and one photograph, folded and creased. It showed a group of men standing in a floodplain, muddy uniforms, faces drawn and exhausted. She scanned them without meaning to, until her eyes stopped on the far left. Her breath caught. It was Ethan, younger, thinner, eyes burning with something between determination and grief. The photo was dated 8 years ago, the week her husband died in that same disaster. She sat there for a long time, the photograph trembling in her hand. The letter she'd once found, the date on it, the mention of Vermont. Pieces she hadn't thought to connect now, fitting too perfectly. He wasn't just someone who'd loved and lost. He'd been there at the scene. The storm. The night Ben never came home. By the time Ethan knocked on her door that evening, the photo lay face down on the kitchen table. He smiled at first, until he saw her expression. "Hey," he said slowly. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer. She just slid the photograph toward him. He froze. For a moment, his face emptied of everything. Then, quietly, he said, "You weren't supposed to see that." "Why?" she asked, voice shaking. "Because you thought lying by omission isn't lying." He looked down. "I wasn't lying. I just didn't tell me," she finished. "You were there, Ethan. You were there when he died." He nodded once. Yes, the silence between them was unbearable. The ticking of the kitchen clock sounded like thunder. "Were you part of the rescue team?" She asked finally. "I was covering it," he said. "For the Herald. I'd been following the relief operations for months. When the levee broke, I was there. I saw your husband, Ben, trying to help a trapped family. The current was too strong." Her throat tightened. "And you watched." "I tried to get to him," Ethan said, voice breaking. "We were both yelling over the water. I swear I tried, but by the time I reached the edge, stop," she said sharply. He did. She turned away, pressing her palms against the counter. "So every time we talked about loss, every time I told you about him, you already knew." "I knew of him," Ethan said. "Not you. Not what he meant to you. I didn't know how to tell you without losing this." "This," she repeated bitterly. "What is this, Ethan?" "A story. A second chance at closure." He stepped forward. "No, you think I planned any of it? I didn't even know you lived here until that letter showed up. The one that was never supposed to be found. You think that makes it better?" She snapped. "No," he whispered. "It just makes it true." She laughed, a small, hollow sound. "You wrote about him, didn't you? In your article." He looked down. "Yes, and you let the world read about his death before his wife even knew the details." He flinched. "I didn't use his name, but you used his story," she said coldly. "You used my life." For a long time, neither moved. The light from the window fell across the table, hitting the edge of the photograph. Outside, the lake was half thawed, half ice, like it couldn't decide what season it belonged to. Finally, Ethan said quietly, "I wish I could change it. I've thought about that night every day for 8 years. I remember his face, the look in his eyes, the way he kept shouting for me to help the others instead. He saved them, Hannah. He saved them because he wouldn't stop trying." She swallowed hard, tears burning behind her eyes. "You should have told me. I wanted to," he said. "But every time I tried, it felt like tearing something good before it even began." "Then maybe it was never real," she said. He looked at her for a long time, eyes glassy. "It was real," he whispered. "You were the first real thing in years." But she couldn't look at him. The sound of her heartbeat drowned everything else. Finally, she said, "You should go." He hesitated, then nodded once, slow. When he left, the door clicked shut like the end of a sentence. That night, Hannah sat alone by the window. The photograph lay open again. Ben's smile, Ethan's distant stare. Two men linked by the same moment that had split her world in half. She picked up her pen, but for the first time in months, no words came. Only silence, and outside, the lake began to freeze again. For 2 days, Ethan didn't come back. The lake had frozen over again, thin white sheets across its surface. Hannah watched from her window as wind scattered flakes along the ice like lost feathers. It was strange how quiet the world became when a voice was missing. She'd lived alone for years, but this silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was expectant, as if the world was waiting for her to do something she wasn't ready to do. Mia noticed first. "Where's Dr. Clarke?" she asked at breakfast. "He didn't come to writing club." Hannah stirred her coffee, not meeting her eyes. "He's taking a break. Did he do something bad?" The little girl pressed. Hannah hesitated. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that take a while to fix." "Then you should write him a letter," Mia said simply. "Letters make people listen." Hannah smiled faintly, aching. "You sound just like him." That evening, when she walked down to the dock, there was something wedged beneath the plank. Not paper this time, but an envelope sealed with wax. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Hannah, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't worry, not forever. I just need to leave before the past swallows what we had left. I kept that photograph for years, trying to forget what it meant. I saw Ben's face every time I closed my eyes. He was braver than anyone I'd ever met. I never told you because I was afraid you'd see me as the man who failed him. And maybe I was. I didn't plan for you. You were never part of the story I was supposed to tell. You were the one thing that made me wish I could start it over. Please don't forgive me yet. You deserve your anger. But when the noise fades, when the grief stops echoing, I hope you'll remember that everything I wrote, everything I said, was true. The lake remembers. It always does. .-E. The paper blurred as her tears hit it. She read it twice, 3 times, as if repetition might change the ending. Then she folded it gently, placed it back under the plank, and whispered into the cold air, "Goodbye." The lake didn't answer. It never did. The days that followed blurred together, mornings of coffee gone cold, nights of silence heavy enough to bend the walls. Hannah went through the motions, teaching, cooking, smiling for Mia, but inside, she was back in that flood again, grasping for something already gone. At night, she dreamed of water, of Ethan calling for help and Ben reaching toward him, of herself standing on the shore, unable to move. A week later, Tom from the post office stopped by with a parcel. "No return address," he said. "Guy came in early this morning, said it was for you. Left right after." It was a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside a notebook, the same kind Ethan used for his writing club. On the first page, a single sentence: "There are stories we write to remember, and stories we write to forgive." She turned the page blank after that. He'd left it empty for her to fill. That night, she finally opened her own drawer, the one with Ben's letters. She spread them across the table. Years of ink and grief, words written to someone who couldn't answer. Then she took a deep breath and picked up her pen. "Dear Ethan, you were right. The lake remembers. I see him in the reflection sometimes, not as a ghost, but as a reminder of how much love a life can hold. I think he'd want me to tell you this. What happened wasn't yours to carry forever. Forgiveness isn't something I can give you tonight, but I think it's walking toward us, slowly, like spring over the ice. Until then, keep the silence safe. H." She folded the letter and pressed it under the plank. The next morning, when she checked, it was gone. Weeks passed. The ice melted for good this time. Birds returned, the dock groaned with the weight of the thaw, and the lake turned back to water. Every day she walked to the edge and waited. Not for a letter, not even for him, just for the sound the one that came when stillness finally broke. And one morning, as sunlight spilled across the water, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn right away. She didn't need to. "Morning," Ethan said quietly. She smiled, eyes still on the lake. "You came back, I told you," he said, voice trembling. "Not forever." He stepped beside her. Neither reached for the other. They just stood there, breathing the same air, looking out at the water that had kept all their secrets. After a long silence, Hannah whispered, "Do you still write?" "Every day," he said. "Mostly to you. I just don't sign them anymore." She smiled. "Maybe I'll start writing back." The sun climbed higher, melting the last traces of ice. The lake rippled, bright and alive. They didn't call it forgiveness. They didn't need to. It was enough to stand there, side by side, hearing the sound of water moving again, proof that even the frozen parts of life eventually learn how to flow. Spring came early that year. The air smelled of rain and sap, the earth dark and soft underfoot. The lake no longer looked like a mirror. It shimmered like something alive, moving again after too long being still. Ethan stayed away for a few weeks, though he was never really gone. Hannah saw him sometimes from across the water, repairing the railing of his dock, talking to the mailman, feeding the stray cat that had decided he belonged to it. He didn't wave, and neither did she, but it was enough to know they were still in the same world. One morning, a small package arrived on her doorstep. No name, no note. Inside, a book, a field guide to bridges, its cover worn and pages underlined in pencil. She opened to a marked page. A single line was underlined twice. A bridge is not built to erase the distance, but to make it possible to cross without fear. She didn't need a signature to know who sent it. Later that week, she saw him at the farmer's market again. He looked older, maybe from the sleepless nights she knew too well, but lighter somehow, as if carrying the truth had freed him instead of crushed him. "Morning," he said quietly. "Hi," she replied, fingers brushing the edge of a basket of apples. "I got your book." He smiled faintly. "Guess I still don't know how to show up empty-handed." "Then maybe you shouldn't try," she said. Meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks, something softened between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but space. Room enough for air to move. He followed her out of the market, both of them walking toward the lake path. Birdsong filled the trees, and somewhere far off, the faint sound of water hitting rock. "Did you finish the notebook?" he asked. She nodded. "Almost. It's strange, writing used to feel like bleeding. Now it just feels like breathing." He smiled. "Then you're doing it right." She hesitated, then said, "You could have stayed gone." "I thought about it," he admitted. "But the world's full of things I can't fix. I figured I'd rather try with the one thing I broke." She looked at him, really looked. "And if it can't be fixed?" He breathed in. "Then maybe it can still be lived with." That evening, as the sun lowered behind the trees, they ended up back at the dock, not by plan, but by gravity. The same boards, the same creak of wood, but everything felt new. Ethan pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," he said. "Not a letter, more like a start." He handed it to her. It wasn't neat. Ink smudged, edges worn. "For the first time, I'm not writing to the past. I'm writing from it. And if this is a bridge, I hope it leads to you." Her eyes stung. "You always know how to ruin my mascara." He laughed softly. "Guess I'm consistent." Mia came running down the hill just then, her hair flying in the wind. "Mon, Dr. Clarke," she shouted. "You have to see the ducklings." Ethan smiled. "Guess spring's officially here." "Looks that way," Hannah said, watching her daughter scoop up sunlight with her laughter. He turned to her. "Do you think we get more than one chance at peace?" She thought for a moment. "No, But I think we get a choice, to keep running from it, or to sit still long enough to let it find us. He nodded slowly. Then maybe I'll try sitting still for a while. As the evening cooled, they sat at the edge of the dock, shoes off, feet hovering over the water. Mia hummed softly to herself as she built little twig bridges between the boards. Each time one fell apart, she built another dot. Ethan watched her. She's stubborn. Hannah smiled. She gets it from her father. He glanced at her, hesitant. The first one or the second? Both, she said quietly. When Mia went inside, the lake reflected the last of the sunset, gold fading into indigo. Ethan leaned back on his palms, eyes on the horizon. You ever think about writing again? For real publishing, sharing? Maybe, she said. But not about grief this time. I'm tired of memorials. What about letters? He asked, the kind you never sent. She smiled faintly. Those are the ones worth keeping. He looked at her for a long time. Then maybe we start there. The air smelled of wet pine and thawed earth. For the first time in a long time, Hannah didn't feel the pull of what was gone, only the weight of what was still here. She thought of Ben, of Ethan, of the lake that had held both her grief and her beginnings. When Ethan stood to leave, she said, "Next time, bring another book." He smiled. "Next time." She nodded. "If you're going to keep building bridges, someone's got to read the instructions." He laughed, low and warm. "Fair enough." After he left, she opened her notebook and wrote one last line on a blank page. Maybe the bridge isn't between two people at all. Maybe it's the space inside us that finally learns how to hold both loss and love without breaking. She closed the notebook. Outside, the moon rose and the lake shimmered, not as a mirror, but as a path. By summer, the lake no longer felt haunted. Children's laughter carried across the water. The docks hummed with life again. And Hannah found herself waking before sunrise, not from nightmares, but from habit. To watch the light move across the surface. Ethan started coming by every few days, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with books, sometimes with nothing at all. They didn't need to fill the silence anymore. The air between them had learned how to breathe. One afternoon, he knocked on her door, holding a stack of papers. "What's this?" She asked. "Our story," he said, half smiling, "or the parts of it I could put into words." She frowned, flipping through the pages. "You wrote about us. Sort of. It's not an article, more like he searched for the word. A letter I actually sent. To who?" He shrugged. "Maybe to the people who never will." She smiled softly. "You know they'll ask who it's about." "I'll say it's about the lake," he said. "That usually covers everything." They sat on the porch, reading in the golden hour light. The story wasn't polished, raw paragraphs, mismatched tenses, but honest. She could feel his heart in every line, the guilt, the silence, the longing to be forgiven not as a hero, but as a man who had once failed and kept living. One line made her pause. "Some people arrive not to fix what's broken, but to show you that broken can still hold." She looked up. "You really believe that?" He met her eyes. "I do now." Mia ran outside then, her hair a halo in the sun. "Mum, look what I found." She held up a smooth white pebble, heart-shaped, wet from the shore. "It's lucky," Ethan said. "You should keep it." Mia studied him for a moment, then handed it to Hannah instead. "You need it more." Hannah laughed softly. "I think I already got lucky." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "When?" She looked at him, her voice quiet but sure. "When the letter got lost." Later that night, after Mia had gone to bed, they walked down to the dock together. The lake was still, moonlight turning it to glass. Hannah carried her notebook. Ethan had his pages. "Do you ever think we'll stop writing about it?" he asked. Maybe not, she said. But maybe we'll start writing through it. He nodded, understanding more than her words could hold. She opened her notebook and read aloud a passage she'd written recently. There's a kind of love that doesn't begin with touch or words, just the quiet knowing that someone sees your pain and doesn't flinch. It doesn't fix you. It just stays. When she finished, Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. That's beautiful. It's true, she said. And that's what scares me. Why? Because I don't know if staying means holding on or letting go. He looked out at the lake. Maybe it means learning to do both. The air cooled as the night deepened. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called low and distant. Hannah leaned against the railing, feeling the warmth of Ethan's presence beside her. He said softly, "You ever wonder what Ben would think of all this?" She exhaled, slow and careful, all the time. "And sometimes, I think, maybe he's the reason you and I ever met. Maybe he was the bridge too." Ethan nodded. "Then I hope I'm building the right side of it." "You are," she said. They stayed like that, two silhouettes against the shimmering dark, until the chill finally pushed them inside. Before they went, Hannah placed a new letter under the plank. Not for him, not for Ben, for herself. "Dear me, you did not fail to save him. You did not fail to love again. You just needed to remember that grief and grace can live in the same heart." When she stood, Ethan was watching her. "Who's that one for?" She smiled faintly. "The girl who thought she'd never write again." That night, Hannah dreamed of the lake, but not the storm, not the loss. She dreamed of sunlight, of ripples, of bridges made of words and hands that didn't let go. When she woke, she realized something simple but profound. She didn't need to send every letter. Some were meant just to be lived. The bookstore smelled of coffee and ink and something faintly nervous, the way places do when they're about to hold a memory. Hannah stood by the window, clutching a copy of their book, The Letters We Never Sent. Her name and Ethan's shared the cover in small, even print. Below it, a watercolor of a lake at dawn. People drifted in, murmuring softly, pages rustling like wings. Mia was stacking copies on a small table, proud and fidgeting. Ethan was talking to the event organizer, trying and failing to look composed. It wasn't a grand event, maybe 30 people. But to Hannah, it felt infinite. When it was time, Ethan stepped up to the small wooden podium. He cleared his throat, smiled, and said, "This isn't really a story about loss." He looked toward Hannah, then back at the crowd. "It's about what happens after, when the letters stop being about who left and start being about who stayed." Then he nodded to her. Hannah took the podium, heart steady. She opened the book, the pages soft from too many readings, and began. "Sometimes we write because we're afraid to speak. Sometimes because we can't stop hearing the echo of what we never said. But every word we keep, even the ones left unsent, are proof that we were here, that we tried." Her voice wavered, but she kept reading. "This book isn't a confession. It's a conversation between who we were and who we're still becoming." When she looked up, Ethan was smiling. There was no guilt left in it, just gratitude. After the reading, people lined up to have their copies signed. A woman in her 60s said softly, "My husband died 10 years ago. I stopped writing after that. I think I'll start again tonight." Hannah pressed her hand over the woman's. "That's all any of us can do." Later, when the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Ethan found her standing by the window again. Outside, the first fireflies of the season blinked over the lake. "Do you think it'll always feel strange?" he asked. "Hearing people read our story like it belongs to them now." "Maybe that's the point," she said. "We let it go so it could belong to more than us." He nodded, quiet. "I used to think closure meant forgetting. Now I think it just means we made peace with remembering. She smiled. You're getting good at this whole wisdom thing. Occupational hazard, he said. I live next to a writer. They walked home together along the lake path, the night soft and humming with crickets. Halfway down the trail, Hannah stopped. Wait here, she said. Walking toward the dock. She crouched down, running her hand along the wood until she found it, the same loose plank where everything began. It was weathered now, its edges worn smooth by seasons. She lifted it slightly and slid something beneath, a single page torn from her. Notebook. Dear whoever still listens to the water, thank you for keeping our secrets. We're leaving you one more, not to hide, but to remember. When she stood, Ethan was watching her. Another letter? He asked. She shook her head. A promise. They sat together at the edge of the dock. The lake was dark but calm, stars mirrored on its surface like scattered ink. Ethan leaned back, breathing in the cool night air. Do you think we're done writing? He asked. Hannah smiled faintly. Writers are never done. We just change who we're writing to. He nodded. Then who's next? She looked at him, eyes glinting with quiet joy. Maybe ourselves. Mia's laughter carried from the house, distant, light, the sound of a world that had kept turning. For the first time in years, Hannah didn't feel the ache of catching up. She felt present. Here, now. Ethan reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers. No grand gesture, no declaration. Just contact, real, alive, enough. As the night deepened, the lake lapped softly at the shore, and somewhere beneath the dock, paper met water, ink blurred, and words became part of the current. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like release. The lake remembers, she thought. But maybe now, it also forgives.